Number 10.
I need to kill Oscar. Ashley, I really didn't. I really think I did that. I didn't mean to hurt him.
That was 17-year-old Dylan Shymaker, who fatally beat his girlfriend's 23-month-old son. I mean, is this real life right now? I watched videos about this kid's case, and his lawyers were trying to justify that Dylan has an anger problem. He didn't mean to kill the 23-month-old baby. He didn't know how to control himself. I'm not sure why there are lawyers defending people like this, you know, defending killers. That little baby didn't have a chance at life. What is his lawyers thinking? What are they fighting for?
But there were other dynamics at work there, including my client's inability to either control his anger or frustration and his inexperience in babysitting.
So this took place in Buffalo in the States, and jurors convicted Dylan of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to 15 years to life in prison, which is the maximum punishment in Buffalo. Moving into number 9, we have this girl who freaked out after she was given a life sentence. She was hyperventilating, like slow down, slow down. So just before the panic attacks were happening, this girl fell to the ground and she started yelling in the courtroom. The woman's family was also freaking out. Alright, number 8.
I gotta wake up every day with that. So, just ask. Actually, I don't ask. I'm just sorry.
I know it's hard to understand what this kid is saying, but he's begging for forgiveness. It's a hard video to watch. I know people make mistakes, but killing someone isn't something that society can forgive, or can they?
John, is there anything you want to say before sentencing?
Well, that was 17-year-old John Freeman, who was saying sorry to the victim's family after he strangled a 5-year-old girl to death. I mean, in that moment, was he really sorry? This also took place near Buffalo, and he was given 25 years to life, and this is for a second-degree murder in which John Freeman pleaded guilty to. So when John turns 42 years old, a judge will determine whether or not John is a danger to himself or to society, and if he's going to be released. Hopefully, if he is released, he's a changed person. There are also many people who have served a number of years to life who just don't get released from prison because they're just always deemed as a danger to society. So although you get like 15 years to life, you can serve like 50 years. Alright, moving into number 7, we have this. You couldn't see the guy I'm talking about during this part of the video, but who you're about to see is 19-year-old Dexter Johnson, who is 19 years old at the time, so he raged out in court when he was given the death sentence. I guess he has nothing else to lose. This is what this guy looks like.
Punishment of death. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is going to complete your jury service. I'm going to meet you in the jury room.
All rise.
The jurors convicted Dexter Johnson of capital murder. Dexter was involved in a carjacking, robbery, rape, and murder of 23-year-old Maria Paris. Dexter is now 28 years old, and he's still on death row. And right now he does not have an execution date. Although someone is given the death penalty, it takes a very long time to go through the whole process. Do you guys believe in the death penalty? Sound off in the comment section. At number 6, we now have teenager Samantha Grigg, who was charged for murdering a Michigan State University student, Dustin Frolka.
Grigg pleaded guilty to unarmed robbery and manslaughter in Frolka's death. The 19-year-old's body was found along I-69 last February. He had been beaten with brass knuckles, robbed.
This case just doesn't seem to make sense to me. 16-year-old Samantha at the time decided to plan a kidnapping to rob and kill Frolka. I mean, she's 16. How do you have these thoughts? She had someone help her as well, and that was 18-year-old Tyrell Bredernitz. So the reason why this doesn't make sense, because it does seem like Samantha had a really bright future. She threw it all away. She was actually a lead singer of her band, and she was actually quite good.
Singer in a band.
Number 5, we have this teenager who, after given his sentencing, turned around and just attacks the people in the first row. I think it was the victim's family. Yeah, luckily the police was right there to get on top of the situation, to handle the situation before anyone got hurt. Alright, number 4.
They understand the seriousness of the crime.
Barbeau will almost certainly start his prison sentence at the Department of Corrections, Lincoln Hills School for Boys, north of Wausau.
That was 15-year-old Antonio Barbeau at the time of his trial. This one is pretty messed up, but he was given a life sentence for killing his great-grandmother back in 2012. He was just 13 years old. Antonio and his friend killed his great-grandmother with a hatchet and a hammer. The great-grandmother was 78 years old, and this is just so sickening. Antonio won't be eligible for release until he's 50 years old. The article I was reading about this stated that Antonio's lawyers said the punishment was cruel and unusual. I mean, are they freaking kidding me? There's no way that the lawyer actually said this in court. How does that lawyer even sleep at night trying to get this killer out to the public sooner? The reason why Antonio killed his great-grandmother was for money. It's so sickening. I think the punishment wasn't cruel enough, but that's just my opinion. Moving into number 3, we have an 18-year-old who was sentenced to 20 years in state prison for using a dating app to set up a robbery that resulted in a shootout. In the footage I'm about to play for you guys, I really feel bad for this mother who is just so hurt. Once she finds out her daughter was charged and sentenced to 20 years in prison, she totally loses it. She freaks out, and then the teenager starts to freak out as well. This one is really sad. Watch.
20 years in state prison.
The teenager was then quickly taken out of the courtroom by police officers, and the mother was just left there to cry. She was so heartbroken, and I would be as well if I found out that my kid committed a robbery and guns were used and then they were sentenced to 20 years in prison. It's like you lost them. I'm not sure if she is even able to get out of prison sooner, but she did use a deadly weapon during this robbery that could have resulted in someone losing their life. Do you guys think that 20 years was, maybe too harsh of a punishment for this crime? Alright, number 2.
Saying pull the trigger that killed your son, masturbates to memory. All of you.
Sentencing Lane to life in prison, Judge David Fury said he lacked remorse and had feigned mental illness.
So this guy might look familiar to you guys, and to be honest with you, I don't care if this guy gets left in prison and forgotten about for the rest of his life. So who you just saw was TJ Lane, the teenager who was in front of a judge for sentencing for a school shooting in Ohio back in 2012. TJ was 17 years old when he shot and killed 3 students and injured another 3. Although TJ was a minor at the time of the attack during the sentencing, he was tried as an adult and he was given 3 life sentences in prison without parole. Well, just a few years after the attack, TJ, he was actually able to escape prison. This was just 8 days before his birthday, and he escaped from Allen Correctional Institution in Ohio along with 2 other inmates. He was able to escape using a makeshift ladder. They used it to scale down a fence during recreation hours. One of the men was quickly recaptured, but TJ and another man who was serving a 12-year sentence for aggravated robbery and burglary and kidnapping remained at large. Police conducted a nationwide search and told nearby residents to lock their doors. Eventually, both men were captured, and TJ was then put into a small cell for 23 hours a day, and he stayed there until he awaited for his transfer to a maximum security prison. A prison where hopefully you can't make a makeshift ladder and escape again. And finally, at number 1, we have this scary freakout from a California teenager who was begging to not go to prison. That was 18-year-old Fernando Elgato, who was accused of rape. He denies all claims, and he was freaking out when he was being sentenced because he was actually afraid of going back to prison. For some reason, he thought that if he fought back, he would somehow be released.
Scared of returning to jail, 18-year-old...
I feel really bad for this kid because if he actually didn't do it, he just appeared in front of a judge, he got sentenced, and now he's going back to prison where I don't really know what happens there. I can only imagine. So I would be freaking out too, but if this guy actually did the crime, no remorse for me. Starting us off on this list, in at number 10, we have a teenager, Aaron Schmidt, who was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for murdering his 14-year-old neighbor, Elena Callahan. If for some reason Schmidt outlived his sentence, he will have an additional 5 years on his sentence. So that 5-year sentence will run consecutively after any other sentencing he might receive in the future for a possession charge. He will also have another 10 years of his sentence for theft, and again that's going to start after all of his other sentencing has been completed. After sentencing, it was actually appealed to the Georgia Supreme Court due to what in people's opinions were saying the sentence was cruel and an unusual punishment. But the judge rejected all the arguments in court and said he finds the evidence it was sufficient enough to find Schmidt guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of his crimes, and the punishment, it fit the crime. Number 9.
We have breaking teen coverage this evening. One of the brothers accused of murdering his 5 family members in Broken Arrow will spend the rest of his life in prison.
This right here is 16-year-old Michael Beaver, who with his older brother Robert Beaver killed their parents and 3 siblings during a murder spree. Is this real life right now? This is just so messed up. So now, living a life without his parents, he will see the inside of a prison cell for the rest of his life. Beaver's 2 younger sisters, one being just 5 years old, was attacked in what was described as the worst single criminal event in the history of Broken Arrow City in Oklahoma. I mean, that is just so messed up. Beaver was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder for his role in the killings. His lawyer did try to defend Michael Beaver, saying that it was his older brother that planned and led the murder. His older brother he took a plea deal to his crimes, and he was sentenced to life without parole. By pleading guilty, Michael's older brother Robert avoided the death penalty. Michael Beaver was also sentenced. His lawyers couldn't get him off the hook to this traumatizing event. Number 8.
Now at the heart of all of today's proceedings was the issue of parole. Judge Edward Lukemeyer, who's presiding over the case, said at the outset that the issue is determining whether White fits in what he called the narrow subset of juveniles who deserve a life sentence without parole.
Well, for teenager Dakota White, he fit the narrow subset of juveniles who deserves a life sentence without parole, according to a judge. It seemed like Dakota didn't feel remorse for what he has done during a few recording phone calls of him bragging about his murder that he committed. There didn't seem like a chance of rehabilitating this teenager, so that's when he was given the harsh sentence. During the trial, it only took jurors about 15 minutes to come up with the deliberation of guilty. He was found guilty of stabbing and strangling Sam Poss to death. He was just 17 years old at the time of the murder. Number 7. We have 17 years old at the time of his crime, Joseph Spencer. He pleaded guilty to 3 first-degree murder charges in the deaths of his parents, and this is during Labor Day weekend. Joseph went on a killing spree. He was given 2 life sentences after he was tried as an adult. He will have to serve 2 life sentences concurrently, so one after another. And then when that's done, he has to serve his 3rd sentence. Spencer's dad was a UPS pilot, his mom was a science teacher, and I'm pretty sure this kid deserves to never see the light of day. Moving into number 6, we have 14-year-old Colton Glenn Orr. And he was 14 at the time of his crime. He pleaded guilty for shooting and killing his father's fiancée, Laura Hendricks, and this took place in their home. He was sentenced to life in prison. Right after the murder took place, the teenager just walked into a police station and he confessed to everything he has done. The Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals ruled that Orr should be tried as an adult, so he was given life in prison. Right now there are appeals to try to have this teen tried as a juvenile, but that's most likely going to be denied. Orr's lawyers are trying to argue that sexual abuse that was done to him was the reason that drove him to commit these awful crimes, but that was quickly discredited. At least now he's going to have a very long time to think about what he has done. Number 5.
Robert, we do begin with breaking news for our viewers in the West. We want to show you these pictures. Aerial shot of a middle school in Noblesville, Indiana. What has become a familiar scene. Students appear to be evacuating, running from their own school after reports that there has been a shooter there at Noblesville West Middle School.
Hearing about school shootings, it really upsets me, and I'm sure it upsets a lot of you guys. It seems way too common. Teens seem to be able to get their hands on guns like way too easily. There has to be some sort of gun control laws that makes it harder for citizens of America to get guns, or just even ban them altogether. I know it's a huge debate. There hasn't been a mass shooting in Australia who has banned guns like 20 years ago, but I know it would be close to impossible to ban all guns in America. Going back to this story, we have a 13-year-old in which his identity, we actually don't know it. He is a minor, so his identity is protected under the law, in which I think is kind of stupid when you think about it. This teen was capable of committing murder. Why then we're trying to protect him? Well, he will remain in the state's juvenile detention system until he's 18 years old, and then he's going to be transferred to an adult prison where he's going to serve out the rest of his sentence. Because he showed no remorse for what he has done, it's likely the teen will never leave prison. Moving into number 4, we have Taylor Lane Gwaltney, who was just 19 years old when he committed the murder, and then he bragged about it. The murder took place in Colorado Springs, where the teen attacked a homeless man with a baseball bat. The homeless man was 55-year-old Doyle, who was beaten to death. Doyle was discovered earlier that morning, partially wrapped in a sleeping bag. He had been hit on the head at least 4 to 7 times. During the trial, a 7-man, 5-woman jury took just 2 hours to convict him. The hearing trial did take 3 weeks, so the jury had to listen in onto some pretty horrifying details about the crime. Well, the teen was convicted of the murder and he was sentenced to life in prison, and he showed absolutely no remorse for what he has done. He bragged to 16 people about the murder. Well, at least he is now living in the right place for the rest of his life. Next up, number 3, we have 17-year-old Gavin Ramsey, who was just found guilty of 4 counts of aggravated murder, 2 counts of murder, 1 count of aggravated burglary, 1 count of kidnapping, and 1 count of gross abuse of a corpse. Is this real life right now? What does that even mean, gross abuse of a corpse? Let's not think about it. Well, Ramsey killed 98-year-old Margaret Douglas, which is just so sickening. I mean, poor woman who lived so long only to be murdered. This kid is just sick.
A sentence tonight for the Medina County teenager who broke into the home of a 98-year-old woman, videotaped her sleeping before killing her and abusing her body.
Ramsey was given life in prison.
He left in chains, where he'll remain for life without parole, for the teenager who robbed a 98-year-old from reaching her dream of 100.
Moving into number 2.
The court, having duly considered your offenses, it is hereby ordered that you be committed to the Department of Youth Services until the age of 21, and furthermore committed to the Massachusetts Correctional Institution at Cedar Junction for the period of not less than 25 years.
So that was Philip Chisholm at the age of 14 years old. He was found guilty on many charges. He raped and killed his 24-year-old math teacher. Chisholm was ordered to serve life in prison without the possibility of parole. He started his sentence at a juvenile facility. Once he turns 21 years old, he's then going to be transferred to a maximum adult prison where he will serve out the rest of his sentence. Chisholm was found guilty on many charges. He was sentenced to 25 years for premeditated murder. Once that sentence is complete, he will then have to serve another sentence of 40 years for armed robbery. Once that sentence is complete, so that's about 65 years at this point, he's going to have another 40-year sentence for armed robbery. After he's done that, he's going to have another 40-year sentence. And it's not done yet. After that sentence, if this teen is still alive at the age of 79 years old, he's going to have to serve his last sentence of rape. So that is another 40 years. This teen will have to become the world's oldest person to be able to be released from prison at the age of 119 years old. Finally, number 1, we have 10-year-old Antonio Barbo, who was charged with killing his great-grandmother in her Wisconsin home. He also had a friend help with the murder. Barbo and his friend decided to try to steal money from 78-year-old Barbara Olson, but things took a turn, and a robbery, it turned into a murder scene. They took turns beating her with a hatchet and hammer.
Sentencing was held today for a teenager convicted in a crime that rattled Sheboygan County and fiercely divided a family. Antonio Barbo learned he'll be a middle-aged man before he gets a chance at parole for killing his great-grandmother.
There doesn't seem to be much remorse, so I'm not sure if this kid will ever get out of prison. After Barbo and his friend committed the murder, they actually decided to go out and enjoy some pizza. These are not behaviors of remorse. Barbo's attorney was shocked when Barbo was given a life sentence. He believes that kids, especially at the age of just 10 years old, shouldn't be given a life sentence. But you know what? If you're capable of doing the crime, then I think you should be old enough, and capable enough to do the time.
Our statutes, the way they're standing right now, 10-year-old facing life in prison, I don't understand that. They aren't adults, they're children.
Starting us off with number 10 are Catherine and Curtis Fairchild Jones. In Melbourne, 1999, at 13 and 12 years old, Catherine and Curtis became the youngest people ever charged as adults for first-degree murder. The two shot their father's girlfriend Sonia and had plans to murder their father as well and another male relative for sexually molesting them. As soon as they had shot her, they realized what a huge mistake they'd made and they ran to their neighbor's house and said it was an accident. Even after evidence of abuse was found, no one did anything. No one believed the two were being abused and they were sent to jail. During their trial, they never brought up the abuse. Nothing about what they had endured was even mentioned. I mean, the man who was abusing them was convicted of sexually assaulting his girlfriend's daughter years prior. Why was this not brought up by their defense during their trial? I have no idea. Then the justice system failed them and they pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and were sentenced to 18 years and probation for life. They were both released in 2015 at 29 and 30 years old. That's basically your whole prime part of life all spent in jail. Coming in at number 9 is Arthif Rafe and Sebastian Burns. Funnily enough, I knew about this case beforehand because it's a very good Netflix docuseries about different crimes and it's called The Confession Tapes, and this was that first case it actually explored. Highly recommend. But anyway, in Bellevue back in 1994, Arthif and his best friend Sebastian came back to Arthif's family's house for the holidays. All was well until the boys came back from a long night out to discover Arthif's parents and sister brutally murdered and his house a complete mess. After their murder, Arthif inherited basically everything his parents had, buying a new car, living a new lifestyle, and seemingly not mourning the loss of his family at all. Police in both the US and Canada suspected the two boys of killing his family in order to get their money. They slandered them in the news like there was no tomorrow, branded them as murderers, and then using the Mr. Big technique to extract a confession from them. This technique is actually illegal in the US, but legal in Canada where it was done. It involves undercover cops gaining the suspect's trust by involving them in illegal activities and then getting them to confess. Even with multiple alibis and no physical evidence, the undercover cop kept probing Burns to confess and he would make it all go away. I'm assuming in the hopes of making his life go back to normal, Burns did confess, and later on so did Arthif, even though their stories were completely different. Both were found guilty in 2004 of a triple murder and were both sentenced to 3 life sentences each, even though they've been in prison for the past 20 years. At first I thought, how could anyone murder their parents, but after doing this video and seeing how many people actually did, I was like, wow, this is a thing. This actually happens. At number 8 is Joshua Smith. Now in February of 2012, 14-year-old Joshua broke into his stepfather Chico's room and stole his shotgun. Right after that, he started shooting things around the house, and Chico and his daughter were able to escape his rampage by breaking a window and climbing through. Joshua's mother, Tamiko Robinson, was sleeping on the sofa when he shot her around 12 to 14 times at close range. And why did he do this, you may be wondering? Because his mother was being a mother. That's right, Joshua started hanging out with the wrong crowd and wanted to join a gang, do drugs, pop pills. He started coming home at ridiculous hours, so Tamiko gave him a curfew and told him to stop hanging out with these people, and that's what triggered him. He pled guilty to second-degree murder and will be in jail for anywhere from 30 to 50 years. Filling our number 7 slot now is Evan Miller. Now Evan's life was hard enough. By the time he turned 14 in 2003, he'd been in and out of foster care due to his stepfather continuously beating him and his mother abusing drugs and alcohol. One day he was hanging out with his friends and his neighbor Cannon, who also happened to be one of his mum's drug dealers. After spending most of the night drinking and smoking weed, Evan and his friends attempted to rob Cannon after beating him. Evan beat him with a baseball bat and then set his trailer on fire, and he later died from his injuries and smoke inhalation. When brought to trial, his friend was offered life with a chance of parole if he testified against Evan, which obviously he did. In 2006, Evan was sentenced to life without parole, and now at 28 years old, he may have a chance at a retrial, but for now he's still very much in prison. Now at number 6 is Jacob P. Ind. Back in 1992, when Jacob was 15 years old, he killed his mum and his stepdad. After enduring years of sexual, physical, and emotional abuse, Jacob hired another older teen to help him murder his parents. Then, in the morning of December 17th, they went to their bedroom where they were fast asleep and attacked them for 5 whole minutes using various gruesome methods. stabbing them, spraying their faces with bear mace, and shooting them as well. He never testified during his first trial since his defense told him he would pack up and leave if he tried, so he was sentenced to life without parole. After spending 25 years in prison, he was finally granted a retrial and the right to testify back in August of 2018. And his retrial hasn't happened yet, so we don't know the conviction as of yet. Coming at number 5 is Diana Ortiz. Diana was 18 years old when she moved to New York in 1983 to flee an abusive relationship, and that's where she eventually met her new boyfriend who was double her age. The man introduced her to drugs like heroin, LSD, and cocaine and convinced that the only way to sustain both their habits was to stage a robbery. Note, not a murder, just a robbery. The plan was sorted. She would pose as a prostitute in a parking lot, wait for someone to approach her, and then her boyfriend and some friends would rob him. However, on the actual day, the victim that pulled up to her started fighting with the men and a brawl ensued and he was eventually shot. While they all ran off in separate directions, what they had no clue about was that the customer was actually an off-duty police officer and he actually died a few days later. Diana turned herself in and was convicted of felony murder and was sentenced to 17 years to life. And after 22.5 years in prison, she finally went on parole. Imagine 22.5 years in prison. I'm only 21 right now and I feel like I lived a long life. That's my life and then some, all in prison. I can't even imagine that. At number 4 is Quantel Lotz. Now Lotz, like a lot of other kids on this list, had a troubled upbringing. His dad, mum, stepmom, uncles, aunts, basically everyone around him was addicted to cocaine, even getting high on it while he was still in the room at a very young age. He'd seen his uncle get shot multiple times because of drugs and he himself was beaten on a regular basis. By 14, he used to have bouts of getting very angry, then crying uncontrollably, and then amnesia about what happened. In 1999, he was play fighting with his stepbrother Michael. It started off innocently, as it always does. Michael sent a blow dart his way, Lotz fired back with a toy bow and arrow, but then it turned very ugly and escalated into a proper fight. It ended with Lotz stabbing Michael a few times and then ultimately killing him. He literally doesn't remember the incident whatsoever, he just remembers being told the next day that his brother was dead and he was the reason. He was tried as an adult, not a juvenile, and was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Even though at 14 the state of Missouri thinks you're too young to legally get married, leave school, donate blood, get a tattoo without parental approval, yet you're old enough to be tried as an adult and then put away in jail forever. Filling in on number 3 slot is John Cates. Back in 2009, John was 16 at the time when he put up an ad on Craigslist offering sexual services in exchange for money, and the very popular ABC reporter George Webber replied to his ad. When they finally met up for this kinky hookup, if we can call it that, John claimed that George pulled a knife on him and as self-defense he stabbed George 50 times. Mind you, George was bound and being choked when this happens, so I don't know how he could have even pulled a knife out to begin with. And if it was really self-defense, why 50 times? Surely someone's dead after maybe a few, or at least injured enough for you to escape the situation. During his hearings and his confession tapes, you can see him literally wink and smile throughout. At 18 years old, John was found guilty and was sentenced to 25 years to life, and at 28 years old, he's still in prison today. Now at number 2 is Ashley Jones. Ashley was a problem child raised by problematic parents. Her stepdad used to sexually molest her and her mum was a drug addict, so it appeared to be a blessing when her grandparents agreed to take in her and her sister. I don't know if they agreed to take her in or her parents kicked her out since she stabbed both her dad and her pregnant mum a year beforehand. Luckily neither died. A year later, at 14 years old, she was disobeying her grandparents more and more and she was dating a boy they didn't approve of. The couple hatched a plan and she helped her boyfriend commit a series of murders. First they killed her granddad, shooting him twice in the face and then stabbing him to death. Then her aunt, who they shot in her sleep, and then set them both on fire. They also attacked her grandmom, who also got burned on the face, stabbed in the chest and jaw, and shot in the shoulder. Luckily she survived, and she also tried to kill her own 10-year-old sister by stabbing her 14 times, but she also survived, thank God. Now at 24 years old, she's still in prison serving out her life sentence. And finally, at number 1 is Erin Caffey. Way back in March of 2008, Erin started dating a boy called Charlie Wilkinson. Story seems pretty kosher so far. After meeting Charlie, her parents felt like there was something off about him but didn't worry too much, but then Erin started to change. Her interests changed, her demeanor changed, and her parents thought Charlie was a bad influence and wanted them to break up. So what do any desperate teenagers do in that situation? Hatch a plan. Charlie and his friend Wade went into Erin's house while she waited in the car with Wade's girlfriend and shot Erin's mother Penny whilst also nearly decapitating her with a katana. They then shot her youngest brother Matthew in the head while James and his friend both took turns stabbing her other brother Tyler. As if that wasn't bad enough, they then set the house on fire and it was completely ruined. Erin's father was also really badly injured. They shot him nearly 11 times whilst they killed Penny, but luckily he survived and was able to escape the house before it completely went up in flames. I mean, I don't know how lucky that is considering he survived his wife and kids and his remaining child is in jail, but it's still a good sign. Initially, no one suspected Erin, but during Charlie and Wade's questionings, they both said that the murders were Erin's idea. At 17 years old, Erin pleaded guilty to murder, as did Charlie, and they were both given 2 consecutive life sentences plus 25 years.
So starting us off like we always do with number 10.
By Judge Rebecca Dallett, who gave him life without parole, sparking the outburst.
So that was 19-year-old Sandell Jackson, who appeared in front of a Milwaukee County Circuit judge who was sentencing him. Sandell was charged with first-degree intentional homicide and attempted robbery in the shooting death of a 21-year-old. Sandell pleaded guilty to the felony murder charges. He was given a life sentence, but was hoping for a chance at parole at some point of his sentencing, but the judge denied it, and that's when Sandell started to freak out. And everyone else in the courtroom was freaking out as well. Now at number 9, we have a girl who freaked out so bad she started hiccuping. Like it was just uncontrollably. And I remember one time I hiccuped for like 6 months straight. It was really weird. So
the parents testified has a history of being someone who can be manipulated.
So this teenager, Jennifer Mee, was being tried in court for a murder charge, and she just couldn't keep calm. She was freaking out while being handcuffed. Jennifer Mee actually became famous after that video, and after years, she finally talked about that viral video.
What happened to that sweet 15-year-old girl that we first met?
I couldn't even tell you. I got cased up with the wrong crowd of people, really. Unfortunately, when I started experimenting with drugs, I just felt like I was invincible to everything.
Now she will be facing the rest of her life in prison, and she may not have the opportunity to ever leave. During the interview, she said that she thinks she deserves about 20 years, but not more than that.
Personally, I feel would be fair is at least 20 years. I do, because yes, somebody's life was taken, somebody's loved one, somebody's child.
Your attorney has said now there's less than a 1 to 2% chance of you ever getting out of here. How do you hold on to hope?
I can't put nothing past God, but I've been locked up since I was 19. I can't stop fighting. I have a family that wants me home.
Next up, at number 8, we have 17-year-old Racelyn Martin, who pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, and this is after he killed his 63-year-old grandfather with a hatchet. Is this real life right now? He was sentenced to life in prison, and during court, Martin was freaking out. And this guy was just shaking. He was so scared. He was terrified of what was going to happen to him. Well, what else do you think is going to happen to you? Yeah, buddy, you're going to be in prison for the rest of your life. Okay, let's watch that again, but I'll slow it down a bit for you guys. It must be a very difficult case because both of his parents testified against him.
Patton appeared to be listening intently to testimony, occasionally nervously looking down. Tonight we heard testimony from both parents.
Moving into number 7, we have the youngest on our list, 13-year-old Kashawn Mann, who became the youngest person who committed murder in Kent County. Kashawn killed his mom's boyfriend. So after Kashawn's mom actually tried defending her 13-year-old son, the victim's family were outraged and chaos pursued in the courtroom.
That angered relatives of the victim, Jermel Stokes, leading to a scuffle.
The mom was saying that she actually found out her boyfriend was abusing her son and the murder was justified. I don't think that any murder can be justified, and also the mom was fighting for her son to not be tried as an adult. This is a crazy situation because you have this young kid who is abused, and now because of poor decisions, he's going to prison for the rest of his life.
This is a child.
Yes, he may have committed an adult crime.
The judge was about to sentence her son, Keyshawn Mann, for second-degree murder.
But obviously, after it all comes out, he was treated in ways that I had no clue of. So we can't say that, oh, he was never mistreated.
Moving into number 6.
Court physically shaking throughout the hearing. Then the sentence was read.
So therefore, it's the sentence of this court, Mr. Rose, that you be sentenced to serve a minimum of 10 years to a maximum of 15 years in prison.
So that was Stacy Rose Jr., who just couldn't believe his sentencing. Rose Jr. was caught up in a fight when 49-year-old Briscoe came outside to break up the fight. He was a father of one of the teenagers. He's also a father of 5 and a grandfather to 3 grandchildren. Rose Jr. fled the scene on foot through the neighborhood, but eyewitnesses was able to tell the police who the killer was, and he was quickly arrested. Outside of the courthouse, Rose Jr.'s mom was freaking out because she couldn't believe his sentencing.
So my son wasn't a drug dealer. They went over there and stole them pills out of his car.
Rose Jr. was very shocked to know he was sentenced for so long. He claims it was an accident. This teen was just shaking like crazy in the courtroom, and he was just crying right after his sentence. Alright, so at number 5, we have someone who isn't even a teenager yet, and she was freaking out. She appeared on an episode of Beyond Scared Straight. I love that show, and I love how they're such bad kids, they get reformed, and then they turn out to be okay kids. But the episode I'm going to show you guys is about a wannabe 12-year-old girl who thinks she's tough. Her name's Ashanti. And this girl was on track, to serve the rest of her life behind bars because she just seems so violent. Who knows what this little girl is capable of as she gets older.
I'm Ashanti, I'm 12, I like fighting, I threaten people, and I'm in the squad.
She's kind of speaking too gangster for me. I can barely hear what the heck she is saying, but from what I heard, she's not afraid of nobody. Well, until she was taken to a prison to see what her life was going to be like if she didn't change. Well, what you're about to see is someone who I've never seen be so afraid of anything before. This girl is just freaking out and just losing her mind, and she's like squealing, I think.
We're getting closer and closer. They are gonna love that hair back here, buddy. Here we go. Ain't no time to cry now, sister. Ain't no time to cry.
Okay, what the heck is even happening? She's just in panic mode. I'm not sure how tough this girl really is. Her tough act just seems to be fake. She's not ready for the real prison world. If she was, she wouldn't be acting like that. Number 4, we have teenager Roxana Silvorsky, who was emotionally freaking out in court while she was being sentenced. Silvorsky pleaded guilty to plotting to kill her family. Is this real life right now? Imagine being her family member and you just found out that this teenager, your daughter, your sister, she was plotting on murdering you. Well, luckily she was brought in by the police before anything bad happened, and now she is serving a very long time in a women's correctional facility. Number 3, I actually just wanted to show you guys quickly a different perspective, the opposite of someone freaking out in court, and he seemed to have zero emotions while he was being sentenced. I mean, watch this.
It is hereby ordered that you be committed to the Department of Youth Services until the age of 21, and furthermore committed to the Massachusetts Correctional Institution at Cedar Junction.
This kid was just sentenced to over 40 years in prison, and he didn't even flinch. He was just 14 years old when he stabbed his teacher to death. I mean, I don't know, is he freaking out inside? Number 2.
That's an extreme recklessness, and that's intent. That's maliciousness. That's a definition of malice.
So that was 17-year-old Jacob Morgan from Rock Hill, South Carolina. He found himself in court after he was charged with arson and murder connected with his 14-year-old brother's death. Prosecutors claim that Morgan maliciously and intentionally started a fire. Morgan was so shocked when he was sentenced.
So therefore, I am going to find that there is probable cause to charge the individual with the found over 4 years.
His life just flashed before his eyes. He didn't think that he would get such a long sentence. He was charged for manslaughter, so he received 10 years for that, and another 15 years for arson, which to me it kind of doesn't make sense because, well, let's think about it for a sec. 10 years for killing someone, 15 years for setting a house on fire. I mean, I don't know. Finally, number 1. I count at least 20 officers in that room to retain 19-year-old Dexter Johnson. He was sentenced to death, so yeah, he was pretty pissed off.
Johnson, the jury has found you guilty of capital murder. In accordance with the laws of the state of Texas, this court hereby assesses your punishment of death. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is going to complete your jury service. I'm going to meet you in the jury room.
So Johnson sat down and he kind of let it sit in for a few seconds when he was sentenced, and just a few minutes went by when he realized that there's nothing else to lose. This guy just loses his cool and he just freaks out into a rage. I'm not sure if you guys noticed, but the woman in front just booked into the floor as if there was like a gunman in the room. She was just super scared. It seemed to come out of nowhere, and luckily there were so many police officers around, because you never know what else Johnson would be capable of doing. I mean, he's already capable of murder, so what's one more murder to his rap sheet?
Starting off this countdown, we have TJ Lane. Back in February of 2012, 18-year-old TJ Lane entered a high school in Ohio and shot 3 students. He injured 3 others. There was no motive for his actions, and during his trial, he showed no remorse. In fact, during his sentencing, he was absolutely ruthless. He entered the court wearing a light blue button-up shirt, which he removed to reveal a white t-shirt with the word "killer" written on the front of it. If that's not bad enough, at one point he turned to the courtroom, said some obscene things, and then gave them a middle finger. You can see that he just doesn't care. It's scary how he shows like zero emotion, and he killed people. In our 9th spot, we have Chaylin Funes. 18-year-old Chaylin Funes was ruthless the night she killed a man named Eric Fisher. That night, she hit Fisher with her car, slamming him through a fence. Then she backed up, hit him again, and then dragged his body down the street. This was all witnessed by the man's family. During her sentencing, she broke down reading an apology note to the Fisher family, but the judge did not buy her apology. He even called her out, saying, and I quote, "The tears I'm seeing from the defendant are crocodile tears." Didn't matter how much she cried and choked on her words, she was still sentenced to life in prison. Moving on to number 8, we have Dylan Shoemaker. But before I go any further, you know the drill. Hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that bell notification button. Just do all that. It really helps us out. 17-year-old Dylan Shoemaker was arrested and convicted of murder and abuse of his girlfriend's child. He was asked to babysit the child, but when his girlfriend returned home, he had been killed. Apparently, the kid wouldn't stop crying, and so he turned to extreme measures. But in court, Dylan was the one that couldn't stop crying. He burst into tears while delivering his final statement. Now, apparently before he entered the courtroom, he told the guards that they should watch the performance that he was going to put on. So it could just be that him crying his eyes out was all just one big act to get out of his sentence. Didn't work though. Coming in at number 7, we have Jacob Morgan. In 2015, Jacob Morgan set fire to his house that led to the death of his younger brother. Now, Jacob argued that he didn't do it intentionally. The fire was an accident and he tried to save his brother, but before he knew it, the whole home was engulfed in flames. But Jacob loved playing with fire, and weeks prior he actually set his room on fire but was able to quickly put out the flames. In court, Jacob could not keep it together. While bawling his eyes out, Jacob can be seen praying. And then, when he gets his sentence, he freaks out even more.
I am going to find that there is probable cause to charge the individual with the down over 4 General Sessions Court for both charges.
Moving on to number 6, we have Antonio Barbeau. Antonio Barbeau was only 13 years old when him and his friend killed his great-grandmother. Apparently, the two wanted money for pizza and weed and thought to do so by killing the grandmother and stealing her money and jewelry. Let me repeat that again. They killed an elderly woman all for pizza and weed. That's ridiculous. Well, both were found guilty, obviously, and sentenced to life in prison with eligibility for parole in 36 years. During Antonio's hearing, he breaks down while reading his statement. His lawyer then had to finish it for him.
I took away someone's mother, their grandma, sister, friend, when I had no right to do so.
We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Fernando Salgado. So in 2012, Fernando attacked one of his classmates with a weapon, and then he tried to insert another up the classmate's rectum. As a result, he was charged with assault with a deadly weapon and 1 count of attempted assault with a foreign object. After receiving his sentence, Fernando broke down. He can be heard begging to let go when he's seen fighting with the guards. He's resisting with all his might, trying not to be put in prison. In our fourth spot, we have Spencer Lewis. Spencer Lewis was involved in an armed robbery gone wrong. He attempted to rob two brothers of their weed, money, and video games, but Lewis ended up shooting and killing the two brothers. He said he got scared during the robbery and that's why he fired. On Spencer's hearing, he entered the court smirking, acting all cocky and confident, which later turned into tears.
The victim's family, I never went there with that intention of hurting them.
But after his little breakdown, he can be seen leaving the court, smirking once again to the camera. So was it all just an act? Maybe. Moving on to number 3, we have Keyshawn Mann. I think this teen has to be the youngest convict on the list. Keyshawn Mann was only 13 years old when he shot and killed his mother's boyfriend, Jermell Stokes. He claimed that the boyfriend was mistreating him. Back in 2012, Keyshawn grabbed his mother's handgun, snuck up behind Jermell, and shot him in the back of the head. But his defense argued that the shooting was accidental. After he received his sentence, the courtroom went crazy. Keyshawn's family members were yelling and screaming, saying that he's innocent. And then one man got tackled and then removed from the court. Coming in at number 2, we have the collapsing duo. In this video, you can see Erica Mae Butts and Shanita Latrice Cunningham both resisting being taken away after learning that they would spend the rest of their lives locked away. Now, Landon and I did react to this video in our courtroom freakout video, so go check that out. But now I did some research and found out what they were in for. So Erica and Shanita were convicted of killing a young girl back in 2009. Apparently they were looking after her, but instead were torturing her for 2 weeks straight. That just makes me sick to my stomach. Well, in this video you can see the two flop to the floor and refuse to get up after hearing their sentence. In fact, one of the girls had to be placed in a chair and rolled away. While this is all happening, one of the girls' mothers is just completely freaking out. It was just complete madness in that courtroom. And in our number 1 spot, we have Shondell Jackson. In 2009, 19-year-old Shondell Jackson was convicted of first-degree intentional homicide and robbery of a university student, Nathan Potter. During the attempted robbery of Potter, Jackson and his partner fatally shot him to death. During most of his trial, Jackson kept his cool. He showed no remorse for his actions, and at one point he even turned and smiled at the victim's family. But after being sentenced to life in prison, his demeanor quickly changed. Apparently he became angry and started cursing at the judge. He stood up to leap at the judge, but officers were there to quickly take him down and then pepper spray him. And that's all for
starting off this very unfair list at number 10 with Santiago Ventura Moraz. In 1986, he was convicted of murdering a 19-year-old man after they had an argument. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but maintained his innocence despite being offered a plea deal. He made several appeals after his conviction, but they were all denied. However, due to a lack of an appropriate interpreter and other deficiencies in the trial, it actually led to his conviction being overturned, and it was determined that a different person was responsible for the murder. He spent about 5 years in prison as an innocent man, but he had plans to become a lawyer someday so that he can help people in a very similar situation. And like I said, we all know there's many people in this situation. Timothy Masters comes into this list at number 9. On February 11th, 1987, the body of Peggy Hetrick was found in a field, and she had been stabbed in the back and sexually mutilated. 15-year-old Timothy Masters lived in a trailer that was only 100 feet away from her body. The police questioned him and searched his room and found several thousand pages of violent journal entries and drawings in his closet and a collection of knives. Even though there's no physical evidence linked him to the crime, he was charged and convicted of the murder, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Well, 12 years later, his sentence was later removed when DNA evidence proved his innocence. Timothy Masters was given $5.9 million in order to settle the wrongful conviction lawsuits. The wrongfully convicted Marvin Anderson comes into this list at number 8. Marvin Anderson was only 18 years old when he was convicted of robbery, sodomy, abduction, and rape. An all-white jury convicted him on all the counts and he was sentenced away to 210 years in prison. I mean, is this real life right now? However, in 1988, another man came forward and admitted that he was the one that actually committed the crime. He fully confessed under oath. He did this in an open court, but the judge who presided over the original trial refused to drop the charge on Marvin Anderson. Marvin spent a total of 15 years in prison, but it took another 4 years to become fully exonerated. And now at number 7, we have Dennis Brown. He was convicted of rape back in 1984 when he was only 17 years old, and this is after the victim picked him out of a lineup. You know when they stand there and you're like, he's the man, number 3? Dennis Brown claimed that the police had threatened him at knife point, forcing him to confess to the charges. The jury found him guilty, and when he was charged with aggravated rape, burglary, and aggravated crimes against nature, which gave him a sentence of life imprisonment. Dennis Brown contacted the Innocence Project and DNA tests concluded that he was not the rapist. So in 2004, after serving 19 years in prison for a crime he never committed, he was finally released. The Dixmoor 5 comes into this list at number 6. The Dixmoor 5 are 5 African American men who were falsely convicted of rape and murder of a 14-year-old Katharina Matthews. At the time of the arrest, the 5 men were between the ages of 14 and 16 years old. During the intense and long interviews, 3 of them gave false confessions because they were coerced and physically abused and threatened during the interrogation. Each of them received at least 80 years in prison, but in 2011, DNA tests concluded that the semen on the victim belonged to another man. All of the charges were dropped after they spent 20 years in prison, and they finally became free men in 2011. They reached a wrongful conviction settlement of $40 million, which is actually the largest settlement in Illinois' history. Moving on to Thomas Hainesworth, and he makes it onto this list at number 5. He was arrested at the age of 18 years old after a woman identified him as the attacker. He was convicted of 4 violent rapes and sentenced to a total of 84 years in prison. Thomas Hainesworth maintained his innocence throughout his time spent in prison, and based on new DNA evidence, the real perpetrator was believed to have been his neighbor and closely resembles him. After the DNA testing, he was exonerated and was released from prison in March of 2011 after spending 27 years in prison behind bars. So for this wrongful conviction, he was given a lump sum of $1 million. I bet you the guy was taxed on it and only took home like just over half. He had 2 types of pensions, and he was also given a tuition at a community college. Christopher Abernathy takes the number 4 spot. On October 5th, 1984, the body of a 15-year-old girl was found behind a shopping mall. She had been raped and stabbed to death. More than a year after the crime, police brought in 18-year-old Christopher Abernathy for questioning. After 40 hours of interrogation, he had signed a confession which stated that he attempted to rape her and accidentally stabbed her with a pocket knife. Christopher was a high school dropout and he had a learning disability as well. So the police used this and coerced him into making a false confession. He was eventually sentenced to life in prison because he was 17 years old at the time of the murder. The jury initially wanted him to get the death penalty. After the Innocence Project picked up his case, new DNA evidence exonerated him of all charges and he was released after spending 28 years behind bars as an innocent person. The West Memphis 3 ironically make it into number 3 spot. This was a murder case that shocked the world. 3 little boys were found tied up. They were tied up with their own shoelaces, sexually mutilated, beaten, and left for dead. The local authorities arrested 18-year-old Damian Eccles, 16-year-old Jason Baldwin, and 17-year-old Jesse Miss Kelly because they were known around town for wearing black and listening to heavy metal. All 3 of these teenagers were convicted of the murders and were sentenced away to serve life in prison, except for Damian Eccles, who was sentenced to death. This is a highly controversial case because all of the evidence was circumstantial, so a lot of people believe that they are actually innocent. The Scottsboro Boys comes into this list at number 2. They are 9 African American teenagers who are accused of raping 2 white women on a train back in 1931. These were 9 unemployed young men who were illegally riding the train. They were held in Alabama on minor charges, and they convinced these 2 women into saying that these young boys had raped them. Within 2 weeks of this false accusation, the Scottsboro Boys were convicted and 8 of them were sentenced to death. And the youngest boy, who was 13 years old, was sentenced to life imprisonment. One of the women who have claimed to be a rape victim came forth and admitted that she was coerced and manipulated into accusing these boys of raping her when they never even touched her. And finally, in the number 1 spot, we have George Stinney. On March 1944, 2 young girls had been found brutally murdered and beaten over the head and dumped into a ditch. George Stinney was a 14-year-old African American who was convinced of the murder as a result of racially biased and discriminatory jury. He was convinced in less than 10 minutes by an all-white jury, and he was sentenced to death. He was denied an appeal, and he was executed by the electric chair. A group of lawyers and activists investigated this case, and in 2014 he was exonerated of all the charges nearly 70 years later.